Greetings and welcome to a quick review on AppLab, variables, JavaScript, and kind of getting set up with your app. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of go over how to set up your screen, and then we're going to kind of go over main focus is variables, but then also how you can use variables inside of this AppLab. So again, one big focus of this is variables, what they are, how they work, how you set them up in code, but then also how all this interacts with AppLab with a demonstration of actual use of a variable. Not the most amazing use, but some use. So what we're going to set up is a screen input, a button, and then an output. And the goal will be to whatever they type in the input will get set to our variable, and then when they press the button, it will take that variable and then output it to below. So head over to design button in the top left, and we're going to grab the text input, drag it over, and just put it more to the top, drag a button over, set it right there, and then we're going to do a text area and set it to the bottom. We could also use a label. Labels work fine since we're only doing one word, but we're pulling text over. So let's name them now. So when you click on them, it shows up, and you can do this. And then let's call this. Well, I'm going to kind of stick with what I like, the text input, but I'm going to do it with camel case. So text input. All right. So text input, and then let's do text button, but BTN for that. So we have, if you hover over it now, you can see the ID as well, text input, text button, and then we're going to call this text output. So text output. Trying to give us some IDs that will make sense for this. We could also rename this to process. You can call whatever you want as you're following along, but that's kind of what we're looking at. Text input, process it, and it's going to move it down there. So that's a setup. This will allow us, as we're using some of these other features, the ability to actually reference them. Right? That's the whole point of the IDs, and then understanding what the IDs are. So let's get into variables now. That's the next few pieces. We're going to kind of talk about this, and we're going to talk about console log because we're gonna need that as well, where we can use our watchers and our debugs. But let's first set up. What is a variable? Again, it stores a piece of information, right? That's really, and it gives it a name. And then wherever you use that variable, it retrieves that piece of information and puts it right there. So let's set up a variable. I'm going to call it, and let's use the controls. You can see that in variables, you can declare a variable, which basically declares and assigns it, right? So this declare variable declares and assigns. This just declares it, and this one assigns it. So I'm going to do this in JavaScript. Now you can drag this over, but I'm going to do this in JavaScript now, and I will use some dragging over back and forth. So if I want to create a variable, var my first var, again, kicking with my camel case, and then semicolon. So that's essentially the same as just dragging over this var x into the screen. It's just declaring it, right? So this tells the computer, create this variable and have it ready for use, essentially is what's going on right now. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and assign it. So if I want to give a value to this, I can do my first, spell it right, first var equals, and this is the assignment. Right? That's what it means when you have an equal sign here. Doesn't mean this is equal to it. It means it's setting it to this value. And then whenever I use this later, and we'll see this in a little bit, whenever I use this later, it gets called. All right, so let's just assign it to test and go ahead and put that there. Now let's go back to show blocks. So we could do the same thing with x by dragging it over, and now we have this. Now I'm going to change this just to new for now, and then change this to new. Oh, I guess we can't use new. I'm going to call it newer. New must be a protected word, so newer. And that's how we do with blocks. So again, either way you do this to get it through. And then if we wanted this, we can call this test 2. So now we have 2 variables, and then we've assigned them this. Now, how do we know? Let's go ahead and use this concept as console log. So when I put quotes around something, it makes it a string. So hopefully, this isn't the very first time you watched variables. So this makes it a string. And oops, I must have deleted a quote. And as you see, that broke it. I'm going to go show text because sometimes it's easier for me to fix things there. All right, show blocks. Now, let me run this program first because it's going to create this variable. It's going to create this variable. It's going to set this one. It's going to set this one, and it's going to console log message. Let's see what happens. Console log message. It's whatever was in here is set down here. Now, let me show you a issue that I run into with some students. Is if I delete message and I type in my first var, this is not going to work. And if you caught it already, it's because of those quotation marks. So if I run this, it says my first var. Well, except for test is what my first var is set to. So if we go here and we remove the quotation marks, now it's this variable. So whatever I type into this gets set there, and it sets to that. So let's go ahead, run this, and now it says test, right? Because whenever you see this, that, it's whatever it was last set to. So essentially, this right here is the same as this. Right? That was what it was set to. Now let's go ahead and reassign. It's the same thing to assign. So I'm going to pull over this X. I'm going to change this to my first var. I'm going to set it to something else. Like literally something else. And now I'm going to console log again. And remember, code just runs line by line by line by line. So it's still going to console log this. It's going to change it, and it's going to console log it again. So got to delete those quotes. My first var. And when I run this, it should output test and then something else. So reset, run. It's whining. Must have spelled something wrong. Oh, I capitalized the M. So be cognizant of that. Capitalization does matter. I've seen that in a few errors. I make it myself. And if you ever see it hasn't been declared and you think you've declared it, it most likely means you spelled it wrong. Or again, there's a capitalization error. So let's go ahead and run this again. And now we get test from this line. Line 5 gave us test, and line 7 gave us something else. There's also, and this is a really nice feature of Code Studio, so you can kind of see where your variables are. If I type in my first var and add this to it, it's going to squash. So if I slow this code down a little bit, let me run it one more time, right? It's going to create the var, create this var variable, and then set. I'm going to speed up a little bit. And apparently it wants to go too slow. So if I run this, it just goes through fast. So this was test. here, and then you can see it ended as something else. Okay, let's go ahead now and actually remove quite a bit of this. We don't need to reset it, so don't need to console log it. So basically I'm getting rid of those two lines. And we're going to get rid of newer because I was just using that to show you how to create variables with block. So we have our initial. Now I'm going to show you one more thing. You can do this all in one line. So I'm going to just do this my second var equals test2 quotation mark. Now it's going to tell me it's not used, which is not. And this is all one line. So basically, this line 4 is doing what line 1 and 3 is doing. So this is an option depending on what you're doing. Normally, this is what I do. Normally, this is what I do to get it all started, is do it all in one line. However, there are times when you want to just create this variable and use it. So another way to get rid of stuff besides going to show text and deleting is just to drag it over out of the way. And now we're back to, we created, we declared the variable, which essentially creates it. We assigned it. We assigned test to it. And then we console logged it. So when we run this, it should just say test now. So let's go ahead and start adding in some of our features. So one of the things that's been covered that we're going to review is this on event. When we add on event, it's going to listen for something that's happening over here, and then it's going to execute whatever inside of it. So this is why IDs are important. We want the ID of the button, which is text button. For the most part, through a lot of this, you're just going to use click. There's a lot of different things, change key up, but for now, just don't really change that for now. So on event, text button, click. So when I click on this, right now it's not running, and even if it was running, there's no code in here. Whatever is in here is code. If you're using JavaScript, you'll notice that it is got this squiggly bracket wrapped around it to say everything inside of that is what's going to execute. So let's go ahead and do a little work with this. First thing we want to do is get that actual text, right? So we have a nice little feature called get text. And we want to set it to the variable that we just had. So let's go ahead and pull over our assignment, right? We're going to assign whatever the value is. So let's do my first var. And then we go back to the UI controls and do that get text. So now, whatever they type in here, so get the idea of that, it's text input. So let's make sure we have text input. Whatever they have, that's going to be assigned to it. Now we're going to view this and pull the console log and do the same thing. I'm just double clicking on, in theory, copying that. You got to delete the quotes. So sometimes it's just easier to go to show text to get to this, but no quotes, so therefore that's a variable. If we had quotes around it, it would just print my first var. But now, as we console log, it's going to say test because I'm going to delete some of these spaces for now. They look nice in JavaScript, but they don't look nice with block code. These first 3 lines, create it, set it, and then console log it. Now, whatever they type in here is going to get set to it and then console logged. And every time they click. Now, the second piece we want to do is put it down here. So, again, great example of using this variable. We get the input, we put it in a variable, and now we're going to set the text. We're going to set the text. So let's get the set text, pull it up here. This is the text output, so our ID drops down to text output. And then again, we're going to delete this. And then I always use the delete key, then backspace. And then we put in the my first var. So I just pasted that, but my first var. And this is a great example of using a variable, right? We could do some other things, but this is a great example of using a variable. We took the input, we put it as a variable, it's now stored there, and we're going to output it. So this should already kind of work. So let's run this, and let's type in first input. Let's process it. Again, right now we're at line, we finished line 1 through 3, right? You can already see a console log test, and it's actually ran all the code. It's just now waiting for this event, right? This code just sits here waiting. So when I click process, it goes through here. And I think we have a little bug in here, so I'm going to fix it real quick. But it's going to go in here. I'll explain it first, and then I'll restart the project. Because we click the text button, so it started. It's grabbing the text, which was first input, puts it in the variable. It should console log it, but I believe it's crashed right now, and it's going to output that variable down here. So let me refresh this real quick because I think AppLab is having a little bit of issues. Let's pull up the console log. Let's run this. Let's try this. First input again. Process. All right, so that's good. Every time we type, it gets that input. It puts it into a variable. Right? It's not just taking it and putting it down here. Right? It's taking the variable or taking the input, putting in a variable, console logging it. So we saw that, and then it's setting it. So let's try second input. So when I process this again, it's going to grab that second input, put in the variable, console log it, and I wonder if we can slow it down now this time. So when I click process, there we go. So it did it, the console logged it, and then so you see that order that it did it. You saw. So I'm going to slow it down even a little bit more for the third and final test. So hopefully we can see this a little bit better. But again, when I click this, it jumps over here, it sets it. I'm going to set the property. So the first thing we'll see when I run this will change. It'll get added here, and then it'll get changed here. So this is a watcher. This is whatever the variable is at any given time. So I slowed it down a little bit. So when I process it, see how it's in third input, and then we can say third input down here, and then it puts it here. And that's all possible because of this variable. It takes the input, it becomes third input, console logs third input, and then pastes over. That is kind of the gist of variables. Now you can do more stuff as we go forward. You'll see where we can do math with it. If we use numbers, we could ask them to input a number and do math. So if we want to do something like that, what you do is you delete all of this, and let's start with 5. And then what we're going to do here is one more piece of information. So before we do this, we're going to do a little bit of math. So I'm going to grab that variable again, move it to under the console log, type in my first var equals my first var. So whatever they type in plus 5. And then let's go ahead and console log one more time. Okay, got to delete that all, paste in the thing. So let's watch this again slower. I got to reset it. It should print 5 first and then stop as we wait for anything to happen. It'll then, whatever they type in, print it, and it'll add 5 to it. It will print it again, and then it'll move that number. So here's an example of whatever we put in here. It's the number down here is actually going to be different. So let's just type in 5 for now. Let's type in 10 because that's different than 5. So again, you see it already printed 5. That was its assignment right here. So its value is 5 at this time. But we're going to change it before we actually output it here. So let's go ahead and process this. So it gets the input. It's 10. It logged it. It changed it to 15. So what it's doing is concatenation right now. It believes it's a string. So it literally added 10 to 5. But if this was math, we don't have to struggle. I mean, if this was math, I think what we need to do is get number. Yeah, I think we change this to get number. It would be happier with us. All right, I'm just gonna pull that all out. All right, let's run that run one more time. Oh, it's still processing the first parts of this. So it's 5. Now, when I process it, $15. Okay, so because it was get text and this was a number, so that's a good point to watch out as you're going through this. If you're using numbers, don't get text, get numbers. If you're using numbers for your process, want to use the get number to do this. But you can see as it looked through there, it got 10, it sped out 10, and then we added 5 to it, and it spit out 15, and that's when it changes to 5. So hopefully this was helpful with a review of the basics of variables and then the basics of how AppLab works and kind of understand, because as we move forward with different pieces, you're going to need to use these methods to create the app and also to save data. That's really the point of the variables, right? To save this data, save the input as you're going through it. Have a great day. We'll see you next lesson.